Hello and welcome to the Tangle of the Day. My name is Amy Lilien-Harper and I am one of the children's librarians in the Wilton Library, and I am also a certified Zentangle instructor, and I'm going to be teaching you a tangle today. So before I start teaching, I normally start with the first step of the Zentangle method is gratitude and appreciation. And I usually have my students, along with appreciating their wonderful supplies, appreciate the time set aside to do this and take a few minutes to take some deep breaths and get themselves relaxed and settled and in a good mindset to actually do this. So I recommend you pause the video and do that now. And then we're going to get started. So before I start, I just want to go over my supplies. So this is a standard sized tile. It's about 3.5 by 3.5. I'm going to be working on this little tile. This is a bijou tile, and you can see it's roughly 1/4 the size of that. It's quite small. I'm working very small so that I can complete an entire tangle in a small period of time, so these videos don't get too long. And I will be using my Zentangle pen. This is a Micron 01. It has a very fine point, as you can see. You could also use a PN. This is another one a lot of people like to use. This one's got a slightly thicker hard point, so it's easier not to squish it. It's a Micron PN. But any point that's not pen that's got a fine point and doesn't have a ball point, it needs to be like a smooth ink pen, will be fine. And then this is my certified Zentangle pencil. And this is also very small. As you can see, it tucks right into my hand, but any soft number 2 pencil would work. And then I have a tortillon. This is a blending tool. And again, if you don't have this, you can use a Q-tip, you can use your fingers. There's all kinds of things you can do. So let's get started. So the next step in the Zentangle method is to do your corner dots. Now, if I was working on a full-size tile, I might move my dots in a bit of ways to give myself a nice border, but this is such a small tile that I am going to make my dots pretty close to the corners so we can maximize our small space here. You'll notice I am rotating my tile as I go. One of the reasons we work on smallish tiles is so that you have the ability to move the tile and keep your hand in a comfortable position. Rotating the tile also allows you to get more consistency with your line because you can use your hand and repeat the same motion. All right, so that said, I'm going to go ahead and create my border. I like to create a border because it takes away the fear of having a blank piece of paper to work on. But anything we do in our pencil, as far as strings and borders, all of that stuff is really just to give us a little bit of structure. But at any point, if we want to go over top of them and make them disappear, that is totally fine. Now, the next thing we normally would do is a string. I'm not going to do a whole lot of a string, but I am going to divide this tile in half. Because what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to teach you 2 different styles of the same tangle. This is a tangle I really like. It's called Well. And I am going to, now I'm going to switch to my pen. There are no erasers in Zentangle. There's no mistakes. We just go with whatever happens and make it look beautiful and appreciate our ability to do what we can. We don't expect perfection because there's no such thing as perfection in human beings. All right, so I normally wouldn't be retracing my border and my string here, but I am doing that because of the tangle I'm going to do. So I'm going to just retrace this too. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to divide up my remaining space, which there isn't a whole lot of. And I'm going to make this section into triangles. So you can see what it looks like when I do it triangularly. And I'm going to divide this space up into boxes. So I think I'm just going to make it into 3 boxes, and they're not perfectly square, obviously, but that's fine. Okay, so I now have this funny looking little space, which is fine. Normally I would do either all triangles or all squares, but I just want to show you how it works in both shapes. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to draw a little orb in the middle of each of my spaces. And you can see it's a fairly small, but not tiny. It doesn't really matter, honestly. You can make them bigger or smaller. It's totally up to you. So I am just going to create an orb. Okay, so I've got an orb in the center of each of my little spaces now. And what we're going to do now is we're going to draw a 9. Now, I like to do it this way because it helps me keep track and make sure I'm doing the right shape or the same repeated shape. It doesn't actually have to be a 9. It could be a backwards 9, but we're going to call it a 9 because it makes it easier, I think, to learn it. And I'm going to do what's called Takeoff and Landing, which means I'm going to retrace some of my original circle as I'm making this line. So I'm going to start right here, and I'm going to sort of retrace my line, and I'm going to make it sort of a 9 that falls, whoops, all the way into that corner. And now I'm going to rotate my tile. This is really helpful. I highly recommend, especially with this tangle, that you rotate because then you're making the same shape and you're less likely to get confused. So now I'm going to do that again. I'm going to draw another 9, and it's going to fall into that corner. And I'm going to rotate my tile, and yep, you guessed it, I'm going to draw another 9. That one falls into this corner. And I'm going to do one more, and it's going to fall into this corner. And that one came out a little more loopy, but that's fine. And I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to do that on this one in the square. You can actually do this with more of a curve, kind of more like an S shape, but I find that confusing, especially for beginners, so I like to teach it this way. And you can see I'm getting this cool kind of pinwheel shape, and you'll also start to notice that there's a meta pattern appearing. So I'm still doing my little 9s. I'm just making circles, just rotating my tile and making little 9s. But you can see that I have created sort of pinwheel shapes, but there's also in that meta pattern, there's sort of a scroll shape here and here. All right, so now we're going to do the same thing with our triangles, and it works really pretty much exactly the same way. You're going to start, you're going to retrace a little bit, and you're going to create your little 9 shape, and then you're going to rotate your tile, and then you're going to create your little 9 shape, and then you're going to rotate your tile, and then you're going to create your little 9 shape, and there you go. And now I'm going to do that again. And it doesn't matter where you start. As long as you're starting in your center and creating a 9, it doesn't matter which corner you go to first, because you're just doing the same thing over and over again. The thing about Zentangle is that very often there's a lot of tangles that are sort of repeated motion, and it almost never matters whether you're going clockwise or counterclockwise or whatever, as long as you're consistent about what you do. So it's really like, it's very structured on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's very freeform, and it lets you kind of style things how you want and go the directions you like, as long as it works for you and as long as you're consistent. So now you can see I got those sort of squirrel shapes here too, but it also is almost sort of forming the top half of a star. If I had done the whole thing, if I had done this as if I had done 4 squares instead of 2, you would have seen a really sort of cool star shape appear. And that's it. That is the tangle. So now we're going to do a little bit of shading. I usually just shade this tangle by putting a little bit of graphite down right above each of my 9s. So I started, this was my line, and so I do it a little bit like sort of to the right of my 9s. So I'm just going to put a little graphite along those lines on each of my 9s. And there's lots of ways you can enhance this particular tangle. You can do all kinds of complicated things with it, but I'm just going to start with the basic here to give you sort of a base to work with. And I'm just going to go ahead and put a little graphite along each of those little 9 lines I created. And I'm working kind of quickly here, so I'm not actually rotating my tile as much for the shading. It's not as necessary for the shading because you already have the lines there. but it does help keep you on track. So, all right, and I'm going to put my pencil aside, and I'm just going to go ahead and use my tortillon to just draw a little bit of that graphite out. I'm not going to do a lot. I don't want to make the whole tile gray. You want to use your shading to enhance, but if you shade too much, then your whole tile becomes gray and there's kind of no point to the shading in the first place. Shading also always makes things sort of, the shaded part sort of fades into the background. So if you have something that you're tangling and you want it to really stand out, say in the middle of your tangle, if you shade around the outside of it, it will make it stand out or almost look like it's standing up above the other pieces, the tangles that you have on your tile. Shading can be as simple or as complex as you really want it to be. All right, so there we go. There is my shading, and you can see it was a very simple shade. And then I'm going to turn it over this way because I kind of like it this way with that sort of star shape on the bottom. So once you have completed your string and your tangling and your shading, it's time to initial and sign your piece. So I am going to look at it and decide, well, I think that I'm going to put my chop. So we don't put a full signature on the front. We just put our initials or some sort of a small symbol. So that's actually my initials kind of crunched together. And I'm going to turn it over, and I highly recommend that you sign and date the backs of all of your tiles so that you can keep track of when you did them. It's really fun to go back and look at what you did in the past and how it worked and how your tangling has evolved. And this is well, so I'm just going to write the name on it there for you, and then I'll just date below that. It happens to be the 17th. And there you go. That is how you do well in both a triangle and in a square. And you should really be able to do it in any geometric shape. If you did like an octagon, it would work the same. So you can do it in anything you like. And it's a really fun tangle, and it plays really nicely with other tangles, especially in the triangular shape. So I recommend you try it out. I hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.